Between the ages of 16 and 20, I struggled with severe anxiety-induced insomnia. It got so bad that I sometimes hallucinated, so my therapist eventually prescribed me sleeping pills. I took them and would sleep for 9 hours straight, not even dreaming. One night, I forgot to take the medication but somehow managed to fall asleep anyway. It was rare, but not impossible. As was usually the case when I managed to fall asleep without help, I woke up after maybe 2 hours, feeling completely awake. Falling back asleep was now a distant dream. I just lay in the dark for a while, listening to the normal sounds of the house in the middle of the night, thinking about everything and nothing. I knew that as soon as the sun came up, I would suddenly get tired and my mind would stop giving me things to worry about. That's how it always was. I'm not sure when I realized I wasn't alone, but I know I initially dismissed the feeling as just another symptom of stress. My mom was at her boyfriend's, so I was home alone, and without medication, I would have heard if someone had broken in and would have woken up immediately, or so I thought. However, I couldn't shake the feeling. My room was extremely dark, so dark that I could hold my hand in front of my face and not see my fingers, but I was sure I suddenly saw a white face above me. In a panic reaction, I swatted at the air above me and yelled, "Get out!" There was no one above me, but the door to my room opened, slammed shut, and I heard footsteps running down the stairs. I sat up in bed and turned on the light. My room looked normal and the house was silent now. Had I imagined it? Had I been dreaming after all? I got out of bed and opened the bedroom door. I called out, "Hello." No reaction. I closed my bedroom door again and began to push my heavy bookshelf in front of the door. I had left my phone in the living room to charge, a habit I had kept from when I was trying to figure out how to stop the insomnia myself, so I couldn't call the police or anyone from upstairs, but I also didn't want to go downstairs. I hadn't heard a door open or close after the intruder ran down the stairs. He had to still be in the hallway. After my bookshelf was in front of the door, I decided it probably wouldn't stop anyone who really wanted to get in, but it would slow them down. I opened my window completely, which led to the roof. I thought if someone tried to get into my room, I could climb onto the roof and go to the neighbor's house, although I wasn't thrilled to try it because, knowing me, I would just fall off. I stayed in my room for hours listening for any kind of noise. Nothing happened. Around 7 a.m., I convinced myself that it had all been some kind of strange nightmare and pushed my bookshelf away from the door again. I would go downstairs and call my mom to come home, just in case. It was already getting light by this time. I ran down the stairs and into the living room without looking around, still fearful. I didn't want to go back into the hallway, so I called my mom immediately. She was annoyed that I had woken her up so early, but promised to be home in about an hour. I stayed in the living room watching TV, and the hour turned into about an hour and a half until I heard the front door, and then my mother screaming. I ran to her. She was standing in the hallway by the front door, completely shaken. Apparently, a man had been standing right behind the door when she opened it, and had run past her and out of the house. He was tall, thin like a skeleton, with long unkempt hair and a beard. I hadn't heard anything since the first noise when he went down the stairs, so he must have been standing there the whole time, waiting for an opportunity to leave. I don't know what would have happened if I had discovered him there. I had just run past him without seeing him. We called the police and they searched our house. They found no signs of a break-in, but they discovered signs of life in the crawl space in my room. There is a part where you can open the wall to store things. I had never used it, never even opened it, but apparently it could be done from both sides. The man had used this opportunity. The police found notes, pictures, and even some clothes I had lost. The notes were hastily scribbled and seemed to document when I took my medication and how long it would take until I was sleeping so deeply that I wouldn't notice anything, and how long the effect lasted. They were also a kind of diary. She fell asleep faster today. She woke up earlier today. She didn't come home tonight. She got up in the middle of the night to go to the toilet. I don't remember ever doing anything like that, but there was evidence of it. The pictures were all of me. There were some where I was sleeping, but the creepiest ones were those where I appeared to be awake. I must have indeed gotten up in the middle of the night to go to the toilet, but was so groggy that I didn't even notice he was there following me. I don't need medication to sleep anymore. Years of therapy have helped, and I have since moved in with my boyfriend. Still, I always check all possible places before I go to bed and refuse to sleep if I am home alone. They never caught the man. He is still out there and it terrifies me. Next true horror story. I turned 18 in 2008, and on my birthday, for reasons I won't bore you with, I packed my things and moved out. For 4 years I lived in my car, worked from 6 to 2 as a barista and from 4 to 10 as a cook. My plan was to work until I had enough money for my own apartment, to then either go to college or find a more stable job. Looking back, I don't know how I managed that, but by 22 I had saved a decent sum of money and began looking for a semi-permanent place to live. I lived in Los Angeles at the time, and although real estate prices weren't as high as they are today, it was still an expensive area. After months of asking around, I got in touch with Anders, an older man who was renting out a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house in North Hollywood for way below market price. The catch, because there is always a catch when it comes to affordable housing, was that the house was very poorly maintained. It had been uninhabited for a year and would need quite a bit of care before most people could live there comfortably. I'd, however, had lived in a car for 4 years. As long as the place had running water, it was an upgrade for me. I moved into the house in the fall of 2012. Anders showed me the building beforehand. He was a short, cheerful old man, good-natured, but how should I put this? Maybe not quite as focused anymore due to his age. At one point during the tour, he showed me the bathroom, then the master bedroom, then the bathroom again, then the master bedroom again. He was just about to go into the bathroom a third time when I gently guided him down the hallway. The house itself was habitable but worn down. Dim lighting from outdated fixtures cast long shadows on peeling wallpaper. The ceiling in many rooms was discolored from past leaks. The faucet in the kitchen sink was broken, the bathtub was heavily chipped, and some of the cabinet handles fell off in my hand. It was a run-down house in a neighborhood more known for barred windows, but still, it was my home. I grinned from ear to ear as Anders handed me the keys. "It's a good house with good bones. You take care of it now," he said, which I found ironic. Before he left, he paused at the front door, put a hand to his chin, and looked past me into the house. I tried to follow his gaze but couldn't figure out what he was looking at. "Everything okay?" "Yes, just that something in the bathroom looks different, though I can't say what." "Ah, it's a good house with good bones. You take care of it now." And with that, he nodded and left me alone with my unpacking. I hadn't realized how much I had missed living in a house. I didn't care how run down the place was, just having an accessible bathroom and a full mattress to sleep on made me feel like a king. After spending a few days cleaning the place up, I invited my sister and her fiancé over for dinner. It probably sounds stupid, but the newfound ability to host guests made me proud. In no time, I had made myself comfortable in my new home. That evening, after saying goodbye to my guests, I took a shower. The bathroom didn't have a traditional mirror above the sink. Instead, a wide, full-length mirror was mounted on the wall to the left of the vanity. As I stepped out of the shower and leaned toward the mirror to wipe off the mist, I noticed something strange in the condensation. Right at eye level was the word HI. I didn't know what to make of it. Somehow the letters seemed intentionally written. It was hard to simply dismiss it as the way the steam had settled. My sister had been in the bathroom shortly before her departure. Maybe she had written the word on the mirror with her finger, and the steam had only made the letters visible after my shower. I almost wanted to send her a message about it, but the message seemed ridiculous as I typed it. Paranoid even. I wiped the mirror and then went to bed and soon forgot about it completely. In the following week, I received a promotion at one of my jobs, and although I was grateful for the extra income, my new position meant longer workdays. Additionally, I realized that some of the house repairs were beyond my skills, so I started outsourcing some work to handymen. It was annoying to only have the house to myself at night, but with my busy schedule, I had no other choice. Everything generally ran smoothly, but every now and then in the middle of the night, I was woken by a noise I couldn't quite place. The next time I noticed something on my mirror, I had already been living in the house for a month. The second time was similar to the first. I came home after work and took a shower. When I pulled the shower curtain aside, I saw written on the mirror in the condensation the words "Stia Lung." 2 letters one could perhaps dismiss as coincidence, but 2 words, a whole question. That was no coincidence. Someone had been in my bathroom, and recently, I constantly had handymen in the house, so one of them could have written the message. But why? I got dressed and put my hand on the bathroom door handle, just about to go back into my bedroom, when I remembered that whoever had written the message might still be there. Slowly, I opened the door a crack, looked down the dark hallway in one direction, then the other. I listened very carefully but heard nothing. I went through my house, which didn't take long since it was small, and checked if anything was amiss. All my doors were locked, all my windows were shut, and none of my personal items had been disturbed. If someone had broken into my house, they were long gone when I checked. This second message bothered me for days. I triple-checked that my windows and doors were locked every night. I looked in every possible hiding place, of which there were few in my small house, after coming home from work and before going to bed. And yet, although I was sure my house was secure, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A month passed without incident. I had almost started to feel at home in my new place again when I woke up shortly after 3 a.m. one Friday morning. I couldn't immediately say what had woken me. Often the house settled at night, creaking and groaning in a way that made it sound alive. But in this moment, the house was silent. Only when I turned my head to the side did I notice that my bedroom door, which I was sure I had closed, stood wide open. I stared down the hallway and felt like I was looking into a black hole. The darkness was abysmal. I waited for my eyes to adjust, for them to recognize the familiar shapes of my home. But they didn't. I couldn't see anything. So why did I feel like something could see me? As if something was in the house, just a few steps past the threshold to my bedroom. It was watching me, waiting. Somehow I found the courage to get out of my bed and move toward the door. When I reached the handle, I grabbed it and slammed the door shut. I didn't investigate further, didn't even stick my head out to take a closer look. My bedroom door had no lock. None of the doors had one except the bathroom door. So I pushed my bookshelf in front of the door. It was a small bookshelf, and an intruder could probably break the door open anyway if they wanted to, but not before the noise alerted me. When morning came and I had to leave the house for work, I actually considered leaving the house through the window. I was almost late when I found the courage to search the house for irregularities before leaving. As always, I found nothing suspicious. After work, when I reluctantly returned home for the night, I quickly ate dinner and hopped in the shower. I remember standing in the bathtub for a long time thinking about my situation. I had heard horror stories about people secretly living in others' houses. Maybe I had become a victim of frogging without knowing it. But if that was the case, where the hell were they? There was no place to hide in this tiny house. I had turned the place upside down several times by now, checked every cupboard and wardrobe. The interior of the house couldn't be accessed via the crawlspace, and the vents were too small for a human to fit through. Suddenly I heard a click, so small that I almost missed it. I ripped the shower curtain aside and grabbed the shampoo bottle as if I wanted to beat an intruder to death with it. As expected, no one was in the room, but a new message was on the mirror. This one was printed in bold and the easiest to read of the messages I had received so far. It was 3 words long: ISEEOU. A terrible mix of fear, confusion, and anger made my stomach cramp. Ultimately, the feeling of anger prevailed. Hastily, I dried myself off and quickly put on clothes, grabbing my phone which lay on the bathroom shelf. I dialed Anders' number and stared at that damn mirror while I heard the phone ring again and again. I had already thought it was too late for him to be awake when he suddenly picked up. He began asking me how I was doing in my new place, but I cut him off. "I need you to tell me if there is any way a person could get into the house," I said. "Every night I check every window and every door. I check every cupboard, wardrobe, and shelf, and yet something is strange again and again. You have to tell me if there is an access point I don't know about." Anders didn't seem to quite understand what I was asking. What is coming in? Let me know if you have problems with rats." "My last tenant before you sometimes had problems with rats." "Yeah, right, I have rats. But apart from the doors and windows, how else could they get in?" "Well, there are of course the vents, and there was a chimney once, but we closed that up a long time ago. And there is of course the crawl space, although you surely have already looked down there." Although I knew the house had a crawl space, I never really had a reason to investigate it. I could never find the entrance, even after I had torn out all the carpet in the house. Probably hardwood had been laid over the access door, making it a rather unlikely access point for an intruder. How do I get into the crawl space? Yes, you should take a look in the crawl space. I barely stopped myself from throwing the phone onto the counter. I plan to. Where do I find the entrance? That will be in the floor of the bathroom closet. I looked around the room. Surely I had misunderstood him. Either that or he was confused again. What? I know it's a strange place for it, but it's only there because this room wasn't always a bathroom. The bathroom has no closet. Yes, it does. Directly to the left of the sink, I looked into the mirror. Into this long, oversized mirror. I had always found it strange that a bathroom of this size had a floor-length mirror. What had Anders said when he was there the first time? That something in the bathroom looked different. I put my phone next to the sink and stepped close to the glass. I spent a few minutes feeling along the frame, looking for a latch. Then I gripped a part of the right side of the frame with both hands. After a strong tug, the mirror swung open like a door, revealing a large walk-in closet. Anders said something on the other end of the line, but I was too stunned to answer. At the back of the closet was a square hole that I assumed led down to the crawl space under the house. The floor of the closet was covered with all kinds of trash, dirty bed sheets, fast food wrappers, beer cans, and as I noticed, some of my own things, little things I had thought lost. A sock, a toothbrush, a comb, and a small framed photo of me, my sister, and our old family dog. I crouched down to pick up the photo standing in the doorway. While I looked at my younger smiling self, I heard Anders say my name on the phone, but the voice didn't sound like Anders at all. It was too deep, too clear, too close. As I looked up, a man peered out from the hole in the floor. He smiled at me, his eyes wide open and pupils dilated. His smile so wide it looked painful, and his hair was long and matted. He was only visible from the neck up, and the harsh light made it look as if a severed head was grinning at me from the back of the closet. Full of horror, I stood up and ran. I only stopped running when I reached my car, which I immediately drove to my sister's house. The next day I drove to the police station to file a report. A police officer met me at the house to check the scene, and I showed him the hidden closet which indeed had an entrance to the crawl space. My best suspicion was that the intruder entered the crawl space via the small door on the side of my house. He had probably lived there during the year the house was uninhabited, and when he saw it was being prepared for sale, he had deceived the closet door so that he could keep a small room for himself. Why he decided to stay or why he left me messages, I cannot say. From his actions and the little I saw of him, I think it is safe to assume he was not in his right mind. Unfortunately, the man was never found. As far as I know, he is still in the same neighborhood. Hell, maybe he is even still in the same house. I moved to another county afterward, and have lived in studios ever since. The thought of living in a large house with all those rooms, corners, and hiding places gives me the chills. It's not just houses that were ruined for me by the incident, but also mirrors. Today, when I visit a friend or stay in a hotel, I must always carefully examine the bathroom mirrors, shine a light directly on their face, and tap against the glass with a finger. Because the worst detail of the whole incident was that when I entered the bathroom with the police officer, I stepped into the old closet, closed the door, and looked into the mirror. Instead of my reflection, I saw the face of the police officer on the other side of the glass. Next true horror story. My mother was on her routine night shift at the hospital, and I knew I wouldn't see her until the next morning, probably in a deep sleep on her bed, probably still in her uniform. I always made her breakfast before I went to school in the morning, so she would wake up to a nice meal. I use the word nice loosely. It was the best I could do since I am 16 and failed my home economics class last year. But my mother never cared about the toast, scrambled eggs, and turkey bacon plate I left on her nightstand. We had said goodbye around 10:15 p.m., and I made myself comfortable on the sofa with my dog to watch some TV. I turned off the light above us to set the mood and make it more immersive. I had managed one episode of Dateline when I decided I could enjoy the experience a little more if I got my bong. So I went upstairs and down the long, narrow hallway that led to my part of the house. I was the only occupied room on this side of the house. The other rooms were my father's old office and the guest room, although this room hasn't hosted a guest for years. Since my father's death, my mother and I didn't want to host other people here anymore. Instead, it houses the surplus of stuff I find at the end of every school year. Clothes I don't want anymore and want to sell or donate, paintings I worked on for months but never hung up, and other miscellaneous items that aren't used but can't be let go of. I opened the door to my bedroom and took the piece from my nightstand. It was almost a sculpture, instead of a cheesy bong one imagines with a stoner. It was about 40 cm high and completely made of this blue hand-blown glass that reflected the color of the ocean after a series of stormy waves. The glass swirled in an upward motion to the mouthpiece, making it look as if it were water frozen in time. My favorite feature of this treasured possession was its ability to glow in the dark. After sitting in the sun for a while, spots in the glass glowed a bright green at night. I walked back down the hallway with it, then down the stairs until I sat on the sofa next to my dog Peep. He was fast asleep while I started to grind the green sticky plant material. That was actually the name, plant material. It was this new strain I had just bought from my regular dealer from the next town. He had told me that he recently got a limited amount of this stuff and asked me if I could be one of his test subjects to find out if he should buy more of it. Without hesitation, I agreed. Discount on weed just to give my feedback. I would be a fool not to accept this offer. So I did. As I held it in my hand, I saw a multitude of colors reflecting off its crystals. It is common to see colors like purple and orange, but this stuff had reds, blues, and pinks. Strange, I thought, but I was overwhelmed more by curiosity than suspicion, so I proceeded to put some in the bowl and pack it tight with my lighter. After the first hit, I had the taste of ordinary weed, followed by a slight trace of citrus. It was pleasant. I paid special attention to the experience so I could give the dealer a good, detailed report back as he had asked. About 15 minutes passed. Dateline was still running, and this particular episode seemed especially interesting to me in my new foggy state. The cushions under me almost started to conform to my body. I felt as if I were sinking, but at the same time weighing as light as a feather. My eyes began to get dry, and it became more of a task to keep them open than a natural ability. At that point, as I slowly began to move my eyes behind my lids, I noticed that I had fallen asleep. It must have been a while because I felt so sluggish, as if it took all my strength just to fully open my eyes. The light above the living room was still off as I had left it, but all other lights on the ground floor were also on. Something I hadn't done. It was now pitch black everywhere except in the radius of the light radiating from the TV, which wasn't very far. The second thing I noticed was what sent a cold shiver down my spine and made my heart stop for a moment. I was paralyzed. I was physically unable to move any part of my body except my eyes, fingertips, and toes. I could only make slight twitches, but it cost me so much strength to do so. There I lay, almost completely paralyzed and unable to move or scream for help, while the TV continued the program as if I were still an attentive, approving viewer. Peep was still sleeping soundly next to me, blissfully unaware that just a few inches away from his sleeping little head, I was experiencing living hell. I tried to reach for him. Maybe he would wake up and sense my stress and what then? I thought to myself. What the hell could happen now that could help me in this situation? The answer was nothing. I felt that Keith Morrison was mocking me now, and the sofa cushion underneath, which once felt made for me, was now stiff and cold, as if every thread in the fabric rejected contact with my body. I sensibly began to panic, not because the realization of my situation set in, but because I heard a creaking from upstairs. I knew this house like the back of my hand. It was the only house I had ever lived in, so I knew that every floorboard had its own distinct creak, and this one I recognized as the one at the top of the stairs. Someone was in my house and standing at the top of the stairs that led directly into the room I was in. Every further crack made my eyes water. The fear I felt distorted every sound so that it sounded as if it could imitate the breaking of a rib bone. The slow descent of the stairs made my stomach turn and my body writhe in internal pain. I stared at the one visible step from my position on the sofa, which made me want to back away and seek safety in the sofa. I didn't want to see the intruder, the person who could do whatever they wanted with me in such a vulnerable state. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from the step. I knew danger was coming closer, but I couldn't look away. If someone wanted to do whatever they planned, I would see it, whether I really wanted to or not. Seconds felt like minutes. My heart raced so fast that every beat seemed like moments apart. I was wet with sweat, even though my body couldn't move. The sound of the TV faded gradually and was replaced by a long, piercing ringing. The squeaks of the stairs near me echoed as the unidentified being stood with its weight on them. Through the dim light, I could make out a shadowy hand holding the wall that blocked my view of the stairs and the person on them. What broke the moment of silence was the faint, muffled scream that came from my throat. It was the only sound I could produce in my paralyzed state. I was like a deer in headlights, the perfect victim for any predator. It was hard to say if I was still paralyzed, or if it was pure fear paralyzing me in this moment. The hand methodically lifted its fingers and slowly tapped each one of them back down, creating a sickening drumming. Once, then twice, then 3 times the solitary hand struck before the rest of the body revealed itself slightly as it reached the last and final step. As its entire form became visible, my wide open eyes followed it up to a height of about 7 feet. It was gigantic. Its arms were as long as its body height, and the creature's face had a mouth that stretched from side to side. It wore a repulsive expression that could only be described as a smile, as it had no teeth, just a huge mouth, wide open, with bleeding gums dripping onto my wooden floors, signaling to me that this was no product of imagination, but a real dangerous threat, and I had to act immediately. The thing let me fully absorb its hideous appearance, so that its next performance was all the more terrifying. It produced a series of guttural, repulsive sounds that could only be described as laughter. It watched me summon every bit of energy simply to scream or move, and found pleasure in my misery. All I could do was cry silently. My eyes ran with tears while I stared without blinking at the creature moving slowly like a lion toward its wounded prey. It was now only a few feet away. Its long arms hung behind its moving legs, still dragging across the floor, while it drummed with its fingers to this nightmarish drum rhythm. The creature moved slowly, exploiting my paralysis. It knew it had to drag out this hellish scene to make the murder all the more satisfying for its depraved desire. At this short distance, I could now see its face fully illuminated. And it was terrible. It was still grinning with its red gums. Its small eyes were as wide open as its anatomy allowed, and their gaze never left mine. It had a nose, but it was just a hole that looked as if it had been drilled by whoever created this vile being. It was almost as if it were human, but the devil seemed to have poisoned this one. It was now close enough to smell my fear and see the glimmer of hope for survival fade in my eyes. I had to do something. Anything that made me feel like I had at least tried to fight for my life. Then I saw it out of the corner of my eye. That faint green glow just a few inches from my frozen hand. My bong. Despite all the chaos, I had forgotten it. But something inside me screamed for me to try moving again. So I did. I focused all my energy on moving my hand to grab my newly chosen weapon, and by a miracle that was only born of a miracle, it worked. I was able to grab it, and within seconds I swung the thick glass over the creature's head, again and again. Its blood was not red like the color dripping from its toothless smile, but it was dark black. The tar like slime was everywhere. I felt it hit my face, get into my mouth. I saw it cover the couch, the floor, and the walls. The scene was brutal. The once terrifying creature was now smashed and bent in countless directions, now somewhere between the state of solid and liquid. Its face was no longer distinguishable from the other destroyed parts of its body. And I smiled. I smiled now that this thing no longer had its smile. I stood over its body, a mix of shock, adrenaline, and morbid joy that I almost laughed if it hadn't been for my intense panting. I couldn't stop breathing, gasping for air, while a rush of blood streamed into my brain. I woke up with the comforting feeling of bed sheets and a pillow under my head. The relief that it was all just a dream flooded my body as I slowly opened my eyes and stretched my limbs. But I couldn't. My arms were prevented from moving further than my hips. The sound of metal hitting each other drew my attention to the handcuffs, and my wrists connected to the bed rails. Then I heard the slow and continuous beeping that had previously been hidden in the background, and it came to the foreground as I began to scan my surroundings. I was in a hospital room, still covered with this sticky, metallic-smelling substance, although it wasn't the deep black I had seen before, but blood red. The unknown voice of a man brought me back to the present and out of the fog. "Miss," the officer began in a low, cautious tone, "do you remember anything from last night?" The question made my face look almost offended after a moment of reflection. Of course I remembered. I don't think I can ever scrape that hideous smile out of my memory. The immense fear I felt is still there if I just close my eyes. Yes, it was the first time I heard my own voice in hours. There was this thing. The officer shot his colleague an annoyed look, let out a deep sigh, and placed a stack of pictures on my lap. My mother lay violently killed on the living room floor. Had it not been for her nursing uniform, I wouldn't have even recognized that it was a human due to the unnatural state of anatomy in which she was left. Before I was even able to understand what the officers were implying, I screamed. I screamed so loud that I felt my dry vocal cords rubbing against each other and released a stream of tears that accompanied the sobs of confusion, sadness, and grief. Out of my violent screams, I recognized an eerily familiar sound. I looked up and saw the officer drumming with his fingers on his notepad, while I watched his mouth stretch into this distinctive, hideous, and unforgettable toothless smile. Next true horror story. The first thing you should know about me is that I am a bit of a night owl. I usually don't go to bed until the sun is about to come up, and that is an old habit of mine. I was homeschooled, and by a true miracle, my mother never minded me going to bed at such unusual times. She herself suffered from agoraphobia, and I suspect she also had some form of schizophrenia. Working mostly from home as an accountant, she was generous enough to align her schedule with mine. Despite all her problems, she cared for me to the best of her ability. I think that's just what mothers do. Anyway, she passed away 2.5 years ago, and since I am the only one left, my father disappeared when I was 10, and I have never seen him since, and my grandparents are dead. I got the property we lived in. The house was huge and far too old and remote to continue living in it alone. Even if I had had someone with me, it would have been too painful to stay. Too many memories of my mother. I thought it would be better to sell it to a new, growing family and move somewhere bigger and busier, so I did that. I got a good sum for the property and bought a small two-bedroom apartment in Toronto. I have friends in the city whom I met online a few years ago, so I don't feel too lonely here, but enough of my sad backstory. 3 nights ago, around 2 a.m., I was sitting on the sofa eating leftover pizza from the day before and watching the 7th episode of The Office when there was a knock at the door. I must say that before I moved in, a solitary woman from the building had died of natural causes, and since she had no relatives, it took about a month before they found out she was dead. Allegedly, the juice of her decaying body had seeped through the floor into the ceiling of her neighbors on the ground floor, leaving disgustingly foul little drops in their living room. That's how they found it. The smell is always a dead giveaway, no pun intended, of course. Since then, everyone living here has started a joint initiative to involve us loners in more social activities, and that includes checking on us now, and then to make sure we are still breathing. But of course, always with a safe distance. This led to some forced and awkward conversations with people from the building, which always ended after long and embarrassing pauses. I find most neighbors a bit strange, the way they act as if talking to you is their part-time job, even if you don't want to talk to them either. They say, "Hello, how's it going today?" Act as if they are listening to your answer, and then sign off for the day. Tomorrow it will be someone else's shift, someone else's problem. Strange, to put it mildly. So when I heard the knocking, I found the timing really strange, but it didn't really strike me as odd. Just more like an overly concerned neighbor with a terrible case of guilt-driven sleep deprivation. While searching for my mask in the dark, I asked who was there, but there was no answer. As I approached the door to open it, my hand just a few inches from the handle, there was another knock. I stopped, my hand frozen in motion. I asked again, but this time with a tremor in my voice that I didn't recognize. In return, I got silence. Finally, I looked through the peephole only to find the hallway completely empty. I took a deep breath and told myself that it was probably one of the kids down the hall playing a prank on me. They always looked like the mischievous type, and even the quarantine didn't stop them from running through the hallways. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and relief came when the sun rose. I had almost forgotten the strange event when it happened again the following night. I had spent most of the day drowning my isolation, driven loneliness in alcohol, when I smelled something strange near the kitchen. I couldn't exactly make out where it was coming from, so I searched my fridge and the cupboards to find out what had gone bad so I could throw it away. I found nothing. Maybe a mouse had come in and died somewhere in the kitchen. I didn't know. Something stank, of that I was sure. As I was about to put all the food back into the fridge, I heard the knocking again. It surprised me so much that I dropped the jar of pickles, and it shattered on the floor. My heart beat so fast that I could almost feel the blood racing through my veins. It made me dizzy and somehow confused. The white of my walls mixed with the pale spots in my vision. Maybe this was what it felt like to have a heart attack. Slowly and carefully, I walked over the now sharp and wet surface toward the front door when I suddenly realized, finally, that the reason for my panic wasn't the knocking sounds themselves, but where they were coming from. Fighting against my better judgment, I turned around and my eyes landed on the door of the guest room in the apartment. It was coming from inside the apartment. I thought about simply opening the front door and running into the hallway, but before my mind could make a decision, the handle began to turn, turning slowly while the dry metal squeaked. My body moved of its own accord, bringing me toward my bedroom and further into the room, inside the apartment. It came from inside the apartment. I locked myself in the safe space of my bedroom and tried to banish the fleeting moment from my head when, glancing at the door of the other bedroom, I could swear I saw a gray bony hand just about to cross the threshold. It is safe to say that I didn't sleep that night. Morning came again, and with it a momentary relief, a glimmer of hope that I would find comfort in the light that flooded my small apartment. But it was short-lived. The night would come again eventually. I turned to one of my neighbors to ask if they had noticed any pranks or disturbances lately. I dared not speak the word loud, not even to myself. The woman who lived across the hall from me said through the crack of her only half-open door that she hadn't noticed anything unusual. Sorry. Her neighbor wasn't even home when I knocked. Or at least I think so. I thought I heard muffled footsteps right after I knocked on the door. But oh well, it doesn't matter. In a last attempt not to experience the fading light alone, I called two of my friends to ask if I could sleep at their place or if one of them could come to me. But nothing came of it. They thought it too dangerous to expose themselves to new environments as long as everything was still so uncertain and not even remotely contained. Can't really be mad at them. Alana offered to video chat with me all night, but it felt stupid to worry about something that most likely wasn't even real while there was a real crisis around us. I politely declined, and after we chatted a little more, I said goodbye. It goes without saying that I was alone. A voice in my head that sounded surprisingly similar to my father's harsh one kept saying that I was losing my mind. Just like your mother, it said. You are going crazy just like your mother, child. You are crazy. Over and over again. And maybe I was. Maybe my sanity was always hanging by a thin thread, and the social isolation had finally brought me to the edge of my nerves. It would be neither unpredictable nor unusual. Everyone struggles. You aren't special just because you suffer. My father in my head said it again, and I had to agree. The facts were in increasing order of their absurdity. I smelled things. I heard things. And I had seen something too. All of this could be explained by ordinary reasons like dirty pipes or a bad smell from another apartment, the kids playing pranks, and maybe even a secret infestation of black mold spreading under the new wallpaper making me see things that don't exist. Or maybe you are just losing your mind. Maybe. Anyway, things could be explained. I repeated these words like a mantra and prepared myself for the coming night. And indeed, the third night came, and with it the certainty that my arguments had less and less meaning the further the clock ticked. I watched the hand turn as if my life depended on it. 10:11, and then midnight. I was sweating, shaking, and so damn hungry, but I dared not move from my spot in the weak shelter of my bedroom. Time seemed to pass endlessly the longer I stared at the clock. A watch pot never boils, child. It gets maybe a little warm, but never hot enough to be useful. 1 a.m., then 2. I tried to stay calm, but in the back of my mind, I only thought of that thing knocking on my door, again. I knew it would come when I caught a whiff of the smell. God, what a terrible smell, like a fatty piece of decomposing meat that had just materialized on the other side of the door. Although I covered my mouth and nose hoping not to smell it anymore, the smell got stronger. It burned through my nostrils, as if I had dived headfirst into a swimming pool, and instinctively I gagged. I barely had time to compose myself when I heard it again. A knock, and then right after the second. This time quiet, almost lazy, like when I was absorbed in a good book and my mother wanted my attention but didn't want to disturb my flow of thought. Knock, knock. Who is there? Such a common sound. I must have heard it hundreds of times. Had suddenly become my worst nightmare. Shortly after the door handle began to turn, exactly like the previous night, slowly, without haste. I closed my eyes and took a deep, calming breath. The door was locked. I had made sure to lock the door. The door was locked. It was. The handle turned with force, quickly, again and again. Whatever was outside wanted in. I could no longer hold back my fear. My vision was blurred by tears. The door was locked. I had made sure to lock the door. Suddenly the handle made a cracking sound and turned completely around. No luck, little one. The gentle creaking of the wood told me that the door was open. Like a moth flying to its inevitable death in the flames, My gaze focused on the open door. Two incredibly thin arms emerged from the darkness. The long nails dug deep into the wood, making way for an equally fragile body dragging itself across the floor. Her eyes were nothing more than two empty, milky, white spheres. Lifeless. Empty. And yet it felt like she was looking directly at me. With a hint of lack of hope, I crawled back to the bathroom door, my last refuge. In my state of confusion, she grabbed one of my ankles, and I saw the skin around her decaying hand begin to sprout with black veins. I kicked and screamed, and somehow managed to lock myself in. Without another way out, I curled up into a small ball at the back of the bathroom, trying to make myself invisible. I wouldn't make it. Neither would she. The black veins spread from my ankle over my calf and then over my knee. It wouldn't take long until they covered my whole leg. Desperate and terrified, I thought of my mother and hoped that the memory of her would somehow calm my heart. It didn't. My mind was a jumble of disjointed moments and murky thoughts. My heartbeat pounded in my ears so damn loud. Outside I heard her long nails dragging over the door. She played with the wood under her fingertips, like a child appreciating a new toy that she is about to break. Next true horror story. I closed my eyes and braced myself for the inevitable. Sooner or later she would knock on this door too. I longed for the nights when my mother put on an evening dress, underscoring every sentence of her speech with the click and clack of her high heels as she walked to the door and left a deep red imprint of her lips on my forehead before letting herself be whisked away by her suitor of the evening. Those nights were rare. When your single mother works 12-hour shifts at the local care facility and comes home to spend the evening drinking, watching loud TV, and having heated arguments with her children, this night was better than all the others because the universe had aligned everyone's plans in the household to coincide, and I had at least 5 hours all to myself. Something I rarely got. I was in my bedroom. My secret snack stash was scattered over my bed, and the only laptop we had in the house was all mine. I didn't know what I wanted to do first. Watch a movie? Sing karaoke songs on YouTube? Host a one-woman show? I decided to watch a horror movie and turned off all the lights to set the mood. I was barely past the 30-minute mark when I heard the distant giggling. For a few seconds, I told myself it was just background noise in the movie I was watching, but my reassurance faltered when I paused the movie and still heard it. I was frozen. I didn't know what to do. I waited for something to happen, but nothing happened. Slowly I changed my position. The bed frame creaked under my weight. I put both feet on the floor and paused for a few minutes. It was most likely one of my siblings who had come home early and was playing a prank on me. It could even have been one of the neighborhood kids. Whoever it was, I was a 16-year-old girl and wasn't taking any risks. Finally, I had the idea to search the room for something to defend myself with. I shared the room with a 6-year-old girl. The whole room was child-proof, and my best chance was a heavy sports trophy. But I thought it was better than nothing. The giggling got louder and closer. It turned into laughter. I didn't know if I wanted to wait here until I was found or start the search myself. I took another long hard look at the trophy in my hands and decided to wait. With every passing minute, the laughter became louder and more enthusiastic. It sounded like a child who knew their parents were on the way to their hiding spot in a game of hide and seek, laughing with the voice of an adult. Then I heard the sound of chairs being pushed over the wooden floor. It didn't sound like it was done with much intention, but simply to move them out of the way. A slippery, slobbering, wet sound followed. It sounded familiar, but was one I hadn't heard in particular. Whoever was in my kitchen was smacking, tearing, and crushing whatever they had in their hands. I heard squeaking and squashing, and I could only assume it was a sick psychopath who had a penchant for breaking into houses and mauling large animals. Whatever it was, he laughed while doing it. I was so scared. There was a stranger in my kitchen laughing maniacally while seemingly preparing a snack on the counter. There was an intruder in the lower part of my house, the place where I had left my phone. I turned around and looked at my laptop. wondered if the police would respond to emails. I decided to try anyway and sneaked back to my bed. My trembling fingers struggled to type slowly and quietly, but eventually, I managed to send an email and ask for help on social media. 7 agonizingly long minutes passed until I heard someone drive into the driveway. It didn't sound like the police. I heard the sound of heavy footsteps running to the front door, hastily jamming a key into the lock and swinging the door open. The laughter stopped for a brief moment before turning into roaring laughter. A scream in an ear, deafening shriek broke the silence of the neighborhood, and whoever it was turned around and ran toward the street, taking their screams with them. The manic laughter followed him, and I finally dared to run to the bedroom window. I saw my sister running down the street screaming, trying to attract as much attention as possible, and to all appearances she had succeeded. Running in the opposite direction was a naked man, covered in a huge amount of blood that I had only seen on TV before. He was still laughing as he disappeared from view. I watched from the window as a group gathered right in front of my house. My sister hadn't stopped screaming. I realized she wasn't just trying to get attention, but was actually hysterical, and I didn't want to go downstairs to face whatever had put my sister in such a state. The crowd grew larger when the red and blue lights arrived and footsteps stormed into the house. I heard curses and retching downstairs before someone finally shouted clear. All I initially managed was a squeak. A female officer appeared in my doorway and asked me if I was okay. She told me to follow her with my eyes closed. Great advice for a rebellious teenage girl. I noticed her grip tightening as we went down the stairs, and I couldn't help but risk a glance. Through squinted eyes, I saw my mother's dismembered body parts lying neatly next to each other on the kitchen counter, her decapitated head next to them. I fainted. 47 minutes. That's how long I had spent listening to my mother being shredded, torn apart, mutilated, and eaten. The one responsible ran straight into her care facility, straight into his bedroom, and straight into bed. He laughed when they strapped him to the bed. He laughed when he was led away in handcuffs. He laughed when he was locked in a cell. He laughed when he looked me in the eyes in the courtroom as his sentence was announced. It won't surprise me if he was still laughing when they strapped him into the chair. He will never laugh again, and my mother will never laugh again either.